Massive damage to the nose, also here, also there. Wait a minute, what's this? Why is there German markings on a B-17? Well, the reason for that is there were, I counted 10 that I knew of, 10 B-17s that the Germans captured intact when they landed. They fixed them up. They actually took them around to the German air bases and said, look, this is what they're flying against us. Learn the tactics, learn where the machine guns are, learn where the weak points are. And then what they did, the German pilots flying our B-17s, they would fly along our formations, radioing positions, or they would, in some cases, attack. But after a while, it became evident to our B-17 crew and pilots what they were doing. Here is a picture of a starboard side of a B-17. This one, obviously, I think from the caption that I read, it took a 37 millimeter cannon shell right in the starboard side there. Obviously, the starboard waist gunner and probably the port side gunner were killed. Here's the damage at Regensburg. All 6 of the main workshops of the factory were destroyed or severely damaged, as were many of the supporting structures, including the final assembly shop. And I know what I told you before, we're going to find out in a little bit. In Schweinfurt, the destruction was less severe, but still very, very extensive. The 2 largest factories suffered 80 direct hits. All of the factories except the Kugelfischer plant had extensive fire damage to its machinery and ignited the machine oil used in the manufacturing process. I'm going to get rid of that. Albert Speer, you may have heard of him. He was the armaments minister after the previous one died. Reported an immediate 34% drop in the production of ball bearings. Both the production shortfall and the actual lost bearings were made up from the extensive supplies they had elsewhere. But what Speer did almost immediately after that is he had those factories broken down and distributed throughout Germany, so they could not do that again. And he indicated that the major flaws of our strategy is that we didn't go back right away. He said that if we had done that, that the damage would have been much more severe. Now, were we going to go back to Schweinfurt? Oh yeah. We would go back in October of 43. The missions ended in disaster, of course. Many of the bombers reached their targets and caused heavy damage, but in all, the Regensburg force and the Schweinfurt force together, we lost 60 planes. Again, that translated into 60 men lost, killed or captured. This fort was the victim of a collision with another B-17. As you can see, the whole back half of that is gone. Well, Hap Arnold, who was a huge proponent in the beginning, saying, yeah, we're going to make this daylight bombing thing work. We don't need the fighters. And again, as I said, in Washington, he was under pressure to do that. Well, he turned around, and after the mission to Schweinfurt in October, he said, operations over Germany conducted here during the past several weeks indicate definitely that we must provide long-range fighters to accompany daylight bombing missions. Well, they found that out at the expense of 1,300 men and more. For every ground soldier killed, there would be 3 or 4 wounded. However, in the air, 3 times as many men were killed as wounded. So everybody that said, hey, those flyboys have it pretty easy. No, they did not. Well, here we are. The Schweinfurt mission, in particular, foretold the failure of the deep penetration raids without long-range escort. Over Germany, they saw no fighter support whatsoever. When the second attack on Schweinfurt happened, October 14th, this is an error. that I put in because I put much of these captions in during the summer, but then I went back and did a little research. We didn't lose 60 on that mission. We lost 77 aircraft in that mission in October. Until Big Week. Now, we covered Big Week in this series. That's going to be in February 1944, and then we saw the arrival of the P-51 Mustang. Those of you who are aeronautics fans know that the P-17 with drop tanks was able to escort the bombers not only all the way to the target and back, but they were able to intercept and shoot down German fighters that were coming up to attack the bombers. The cost of the mission, 376 bombers were deployed, 60 lost. 3 P-47s and Spitfires, 148 had minor damage. Here's a couple fun facts for you, not so fun. Number of B-17s built in World War II, 12,732. Lost in combat, 4,700. Overall U.S. bomber losses, 22,000 lost in combat, but 42,000 were lost in accidents. And one of the trivia is that a whole bunch of those B-17s were lost just leaving America, going to England. But then there were training accidents, there were accidents on the different bases. 21,000 were lost overseas, but we lost 21,000 here in our country in training accidents. Schweinfurt was bombed 22 times. Most of the city was destroyed. Regensburg only 3 times, and as we know, Bonn, thanks to Harry Crosby, not once. What was the results of the Regensburg Raid that was unknown at the time?
What's that picture? Is that?
That's Regensburg today.
Oh.
That's Regensburg today. And this is what you've all been holding your breath for, to find out, okay? And I want you to understand how important this is. The Regensburg Messerschmitt factory that was destroyed. Many of the machine shops and specialized work tools, the dies, etc., for the Messerschmitt jet fighter 262 were either damaged or destroyed. It set back the German jet fighter program by months and months. And as we all know, as the war started winding down, those months were going to become very important. But because Mr. Hitler, who, as they used to say, was a ground pounder in World War I, knew very little about the other services he was lording over, he wanted to turn the Messerschmitt 262 into a bomber, and which was really quite ridiculous. But then he was also, because Germany had been suffering so much from bombing raids, he was hyper-focused on the revenge weapons, the V1, the V2. He wanted to turn everything into a bomber, which made things even worse. Oh, here's our pop quiz number 2. Again, you know, put your hand up.
Ball bearing.
Got a ball bearing?
What's Bogey have as his hand?
Ball bearing.
Yeah, ball bearing. Well, that's not going to earn you this. You have to name the movie. Oh, not you, I'm sorry. You can't win twice.
Cane Mutiny.
What?
The Cane Mutiny.
Hey, mutiny.
Oh, ho, ho, yeah.
You want that or a book?
Ball bearing. I've got a book.
There you go.
All right.
The Cane Mutiny. Wait, I'm sorry. Yep, there it is, the Cane Mutiny. And in that movie, okay, of course, he was sort of like a modern-day Captain Ahab, as you know.
Yeah.
He said that there's the right way, the wrong way, the Navy way, and my way, or he could have put that underneath that, my way or the highway, right? His name was Captain Queeg, which is very odd because Queeg was also the name of a crew member on the Captain Ahab ship. 2 ball bearings which symbolized Queeg's insecurity. And that's what he has there, because he'd sit at the table and roll those 2 ball bearings around and around and around and around like that. How were those questions this time, okay? Oh, good, all right. Here is our sources that we used for this presentation. Of course, Masters of the Air, Martin Middlebrook, the Schweinfurt Regensburg mission. Harry Crosby's A Wing and a Prayer. If you read none of these books, I mean, even this one, Master's There, if you read none of these books, you have to read A Wing and a Prayer. Excellent, excellent story. Martin Caden, Black Thursday, that actually talks about the October 1943 raid, but also covers the August one as well. And the other two, those were sources that we used. So now, let's have some questions. I'll do my best. Yes, sir.
On the B-17, the gunner below the plane,
The ball turret.
they had, boy, if you were in there, that was a hydraulic. They had to raise it up.
Yes.
And sometimes they couldn't get
They
it up.
couldn't because it went out.
When you land, he's wiped out.
Exactly.
And the crew's up there knowing this guy down in there is gonna...
Yeah. And that's an interesting point you bring up, because in a couple of these sources that we looked at, there was a story, I recall, of, again, everything being shot up on the bomber and the landing gear not being able to go down, and they couldn't even crank them down. They would come in and do a belly landing, and of course the ball turret gunner, and if he didn't get out, would have been killed. Any other questions?
The raid where they flew into Africa after dropping their bombs, did they do that again? I mean, that seemed...
That's the only one I know of, but also in Africa, that was the base for the 15th Air Force down there, and those, that is where the RB-24s originated from that went up to Romania. But Harry Crosby in his book says he's very, very admired the 15th Air Force. And a lot of people were putting them down because they said they didn't have a good record or something like that. But after Ploeste, there was no more talk about that. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
I seem to remember a book, The Wild Blue. It's George McGovern flying. I think they were liberators, but for the oil fields of Ploeste.
Yes.
I thought they took off from Italy. No, from Africa.
No, I thought they were Africa.
Okay.
Yeah. I'll check that, but I thought it was Africa. So, yes, sir.
I was going to say, because the British had been, bombing for a couple years before we got involved, and found daylight bombing not to be very successful and very dangerous, how come the Americans continue to do that?
Well, again, a lot of this, as I said, was emanating from Washington. They were pushing. They wanted to get, and I don't think I mentioned this, I meant to. That first raid that we did in August 1942, it was 12 B-17s went across, and they bombed a rail marshalling yard in there. And they were very comfortable doing this raid. They had an incredible escort of Spitfires and P-47s. We didn't lose one B-17. Two crew members of a B-17 were injured when a pigeon hit the plexiglass and shattered it. But they came back with no problems at all. But there was this mindset that those 10 guns on a B-17 paired with one in front, one in back, one on either side would be enough to protect the whole formation. And they found out that just didn't work.
I could add, since you mentioned the British bombing at night, that the British bombing was highly inaccurate. All they could hope to do was set fire to whole cities or bomb whole cities. And the reason that this was important was that this was simply the only way Britain had of striking back.
Yes.
And was hugely popular.
Yes. And I forget his first name, Richard. Harris?
Harris.
What?
Bomber Harris.
Bomber Harris.
Yeah, well, let's call him Bomber Harris, yeah. He tried to warn the Americans about this, and there was a lot of conflict going back and forth. And after a while, it said, okay, you guys, you go ahead, find out for yourselves. And that's exactly what happened. Yes, sir.
What is the relative difference in speed between the B-7?
I'm glad you asked me that question.
The wild guys that
I'm
are
glad.
swimming around?
Thanks for reminding me. And I'm going to tell you a story right now that I meant to do, but I forgot. This also. This also was in Harry Crosby's book. See, I can come back out here. I don't have to worry about feedback. This was in Harry Crosby's book, that the problem with a head-on pass with a German fighter and a bomber, and it's sort of like a game of chicken, it was who's going to move first, okay? If the B-17 moves first and goes out of formation, one of his friends are going to pick them off over there. If this guy, maybe he'll leave and go. But Crosby tells the one story, and this is really frightening. These two planes are coming together at 500 miles per hour, at least. And he tells the story of the one German fighter that was coming in straight and level. They collided, and the whole fuselage of the German fighter went through the whole fuselage of the bomber and came out the back, and the plane went down. Thanks for reminding me. Any other questions?
Can I get one clarification on the
Yes.
purpose of what they did at the West was?
Those were the major oil refractories that the Germans had a huge supply of oil coming from there. And after a while, the bombing campaign would focus on three things. It would focus on the ball bearings, oil, and the aircraft factories. And those were the ones that they would start pinpointing. If you remember our presentation on Big Week, the thing is, that philosophy was to get as many German fighter aircraft into the air as possible to shoot them down. And why they wanted to make France and the areas where our guys would be going in June 1944, where we would have air superiority over that. And that actually worked. The Germans flew some missions on D-Day, but nothing like it would have been had they not destroyed tons and tons of German aircraft before that. Yes, sir. Whoa.
We had Will Run in Detroit,
That's right.
and they made the bombers